Dr. Elizabeth Heilman of Wichita State University is an expert in the fields of human and ecosystem ecology, localized food and community, and building emotional resilience. Her work includes over 60 published book chapters and articles, 6 books, and has earned her recognition, including an American Educational Research Association Book of the Year award. Recently, Dr. Heilman has been a keynote speaker for the National Center for Appropriate Technology, the Endowed Pritchard Lecture for the Soil and Water Conservation Society, and the Missouri Farm to Fork Summit. She's also led webinars in Colorado, Texas, Virginia, and Kansas on the social, cultural, and emotional needs of producers and rural mental health. Moreover, Dr. Heilman's impactful presence has been felt at regional field days and conservation events throughout the United States, spanning from Maine to New Mexico and in the Czech Republic, as well as Ecuador. With her family, she runs cattle in Kansas and has a farm in Wisconsin. So please help me welcome Dr. Heilman to the stage.
Alrighty, so I'm going to tell you about how I came to study this topic. Back in 2005, I was a professor at Michigan State University, and can you guys still hear me if I go here? I can't wander. Okay, because I tend to wander. Okay, is that working? Press. Hello? Yes? Okay, great. Okay. So back in 2005, I was a professor at Michigan State University, and one of the courses I taught was a research methods class for doctoral students. And I had 3 of my doc students who were all working on soil health education. 2 were American, 1 was from Kenya, and their work was fantastic. Everything that the fundamentals that we talk about now about soil health, about integrating livestock, about how to do AMP grazing was pretty much understood in 2005. No-till on the plains was about 6 or 7 years old then. And I thought, okay, it's 2005, by 2010, the whole country will be doing this, right? I was so excited. I thought, we know all the agronomy, there's enthusiastic people, there's organizations, and did that happen? No, okay, so that was a big reason why I came to study this topic. A second story about why I came to work on this is there were 3 different events that I went to. One where I was talking to or I was attending that were, field days, regenerative ag events, and I saw the same young farmer 3 times in a row. And I said, have you gotten started yet? Have you gotten started yet? What do you understand it? He says, I do understand it. I'm just waiting for it to feel right, okay? So that was a lot of investment in conferences, okay? So I'll talk about what grit is, the kinds of stress and trauma that are common among farmers and ranchers, and how we can understand and address it. Because the young man that wasn't getting started, it wasn't agronomic knowledge, it was emotional, right? And back in 2005, we understood all the agronomy, and so it wasn't, not all of it, but a lot of it, right? It wasn't just agronomics, it was keeping everyone from doing this. Okay, so what is grit? So the farmers and ranchers that are the most successful don't necessarily have the best land, the most money, the most information. They actually have these emotional habits that have to do with grit that enable them to be successful. Now, this concept came from a study on West Point graduates, and what they found was that the West Point graduates that were the most successful after 4 years at West Point, they weren't the ones that were the most physically fit, that they could tell from their entrance scores and all of this. They didn't necessarily have the best grades. They were the ones that had the most emotional resilience. They were the most successful. And it matters because when we make decisions, it isn't just our logical mind that affects us. Often it's our gut feelings, right? So that farmer that felt like it wasn't right yet, that was a gut feeling that it wasn't time to start. Okay, so let's talk about what those gut feelings are. So our brains can be hijacked by emotions easily. And so what we are, now I'm gonna have to move my hands. Does this one work too? Can I do it both ways? Okay, great. Okay, so what a human being is fundamentally Our brains have reptilian structures that are identical to reptiles, and on top of that, we have a mammal kind of mindset and emotional structure, and popped on top of that is a frontal cortex. And so what happens is that if we experience chronic or acute stress or trauma, our inner lizard decides that we are not the best equipped to make the decisions. The inner lizard says, you're no longer in charge of this, I'm taking over. And it can be something that we're not even fully aware of happening to us. It's an evolutionary measure. It's an evolutionary phenomena. So what we want to do is make sure that all of us, and farmers and ranchers, are able to have our inner wizard run the farm and not our inner lizard. And we have to become aware of when we're affected by that sort of subterranean stress and trauma-driven thinking. Okay, so this is emotional ecology theory that I've developed to talk about this. So what are our 4 core needs? We all have a need for safety, and that is run by dopamine. And if we experience a chronic lack of safety, we have 2 big risks. We can either become a daredevil and overly risk-taking, or more common, we become avoidant. We become a little fearful. And that is a lot like that young farmer that was interested in regenerative ag, but never starting. It wasn't feeling right. It didn't feel safe yet. Everybody has a need for esteem and competence, and there's 2 kinds of reactions that we have if that's threatened. Shame is an epidemic in this country, so we either become workaholics, successaholics, and we don't feel good unless we have prizes and stickers and external rewards, or we don't start something because we are afraid of what it will feel like to our self-esteem if it doesn't go right. Everybody has a need for love and belonging, and the 2 things that can go wrong with that is that we can become overly focused on what other people think of us, or we can become very calculating about our relationships. So a Machiavellian, always trying to school relationships, figure out what other people are thinking. And then finally, we have a need for justice, for things to be fair. And when that goes wrong, it can either make us hot-headed, we carry a chip on our shoulder, we have unresolved anger, or it can make us hyper-apathetic. Why even try? Nothing goes right. So these are the 4 core themes that I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to talk about how they can affect us as farmers and ranchers. Okay, so the first one is safety. Now, farmers are lucky. Farmers and ranchers get to win the prize of having the most safety trauma of any profession, okay? Number 1. Other people that are up on this list are surgeons and firefighters, and guess what? Conservationists. It's true, yes, because you have high stakes issues and a low amount of personal control. That's the definition of a stress cocktail, right? You can't count on the rain. You don't know what input costs are gonna be. So surgeons have it because they can't always control what an operation is going to be like. So it's a super high traumatizing profession. And remember, what does that mean? That people that carry that, it's going to make you hesitant to make changes. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Let's break it down a bit. Farmers have more injury-related events, both accidents and death, than any other profession. So, yeah. So everyone knows someone who's gotten hurt. Most people know people in their communities that have been killed. And what that does to you physiologically, it's that thing that you might not be aware of. You just have this sense that you don't want any novelty. You don't want to try something new. It makes your inner lizard say, we are not taking any risks, right? You might not even be aware of it. So this one here comes from a study that American Farm Bureau did. 91% of farmers think that financial issues are impacting mental health of farmers, fear of losing the farm, farm problems, business problems. That's a lot. Right, and so these are things that can add stress that we know about. right? So unpredictable input costs, seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, buying hay, fuel cost. The outcomes are unpredictable, drought, flood. You can have pesticide drift from another farm, even if you're trying to do everything right on your own farm. There's uncontrollable policy factors. Policies change. Some of them are irrational. We have a farm in Wisconsin, and we're sad to learn that a lot of the rules about drainage and wet areas are completely different than Kansas or even Michigan in similar terrain, causing me farmer stress, right? Sales prices. Who hasn't ever looked at a commodity price and you're figuring how much you're going to earn, and by the time you're ready to sell, it changes? Although cattle is up right now, right? So that's very stressful. You can't predict it. And then regenerative farming and new techniques can cause you to, have to buy more equipment, learn new information, skills. So it's interesting because the figure right now nationally is, when we look at full adoption of regenerative farming and ranching, it's only 20%, right? And so it is right now going through an exponential change up, finally. There's a big uptick in regenerative practices, but farmers and ranchers earn more money, right? It's going to reduce physiological stress on the land. It's going to reduce stress for the farmers because you'll have more reliable outcomes, and yet we're still at this 20%. So one of the things that we should think about with why people don't start is 75% of our sensory apparatus is visual. And if you've grown up doing certain practices look right, okay? And so for me, because I grew up around dairy cattle, then I think a Holstein is the right cattle for dairy. And it always looks wrong when I see Jersey cattle, right? And so for those of you that talk to farmers, say it's going to feel wrong, it's going to look wrong, right? You have to start off by admitting that we have these reactions. And to many farmers, that field over there looks sloppy or dirty, right? And my former father-in-law used to think that people that were doing no-till were lazy, right? And their fields look dirty, a cover crop looks dirty. So that's a huge change just in terms of what your gut feeling is about how something looks. So, in fact, with Alejandro, I think a couple of years ago, we did some field days in New Mexico and some work with NCAT, and it was very helpful to have the rancher there who had just drilled in seeds into his heavily overgrazed pastures to tell everybody else, I was shaking when I drilled my first cover crop, okay? So he was completely on board with why he should do it, right? So we have to normalize this for ourselves when we're making decisions and we feel sick about it and it doesn't feel right and we have to do it as a farmer or rancher. Why do we feel that way? Because we're in a highly stressful, traumatizing occupation, right? So when he was able to tell his neighbors I was shaking when I drilled seed into my pasture, that gave them permission to feel anxious about it, right? So a lot of the good farm choices feel wrong, but they are right? So we have to realize that that can be a barrier. Now, innovative people like Alejandro, there's innovators that are usually the first 15% of adopters of new practices. There's a whole bunch of sociological research on this that says they have different personality types than the next 35, 45% of people that start a new practice. And one is that they're more comfortable with risk-taking in general. Another is that they are creative and willing to experiment. A big one is that they really don't care what people think, right? And so Dan DeSutter, who's an organic regenerative farmer in Indiana with over 10,000 acres, he says, oh, they laugh at me, I don't care. But that's not common, is it, right? Because social acceptance and the need to belong is a fundamental human need, right? So sometimes when innovators talk to new farmers, they can't necessarily relate with being embarrassed when someone drives by, and sees a field that looks different from a new field, right? Or they might not themselves have a lot of anxiety about a new practice, right? So here we go. That's it again. Avoiding risk, never starting. All right, so these are techniques that can help with that feeling of safety trauma. This is a big one, very important. And what it is that you do the first thing in the season, in the week, in the day that you're most procrastinating, okay? It's called eating the frog, and it means that if the first thing that you do is to eat a frog, the rest of the day goes well. I guess nobody wants to start the day off by eating a frog, right? So another producer that I've worked with, Wayne, it's like, hadn't gotten started, so it's like, well, Wayne, what happened? He's like, oh, I kept forgetting to order my cover seat, and I really couldn't decide which drill I wanted, okay, right? So how do we understand that? We will, without our even being aware of it, self-sabotage when we're trying something new and we carry safety trauma, okay? I once had a really bad experience with a dentist. Can anybody relate? Okay, and so for me, my frontal cortex says, go to the dentist, right? And I don't believe the dentist will hurt me. But my inner lizard says, we don't remember, we have the appointment today. See what I mean? I'll forget. I'll just forget, right? So that's a self-sabotage thing. So that's like, Wayne, I forgot to order my cover seat. I just got paralyzed with trying to decide what kind of, drill that I wanted, right? So if you have friends that are doing this, if you're working with farmers that are trying to adopt it, offering this kind of support, you make a list, right? What is the most important thing? A, B, C, D, E. You write it down every day. You hold yourself accountable to it. And we need to make this language part of language in farming, right? That we are going to be potentially avoiding things that will help us get going. This is another thing that's important. And this is that you keep a done list. And the reason is that when you write a to-do list, your inner lizard says, why are we farming and ranching? We have a list that never ends. Does anybody ever catch up in farming or ranching? Right? And so what you're doing is biochemically changing your mindset, right? So when you do a done list, then your brain gets a dopamine hit. You're attending to the fact that you actually do get stuff done, right? So if you write a to-do list, the feeling is mild anxiety when you're done. When you write a list of all that you accomplished at the end of the day, then you get little dopamine hits. And when you do the frog that you're avoiding and you get it done, you feel a sense of relief, right? Have you ever had it? It's lingering and you're like, why didn't I do that sooner, right? I should have done it. And so you get that relief. And then when you do something that for you is hard, you get a dopamine hit. Now this might sound like a small thing. Gratitude journals are very important. We had a fellow that we worked with who was in the Panhandle and he lost his house. They had a little Airbnb cabin. They had huge fires. They lost one of their herds, right? Really devastating. He works with us. We work with farmers. We do emotional, practical coaching as well as agronomic coaching, and he was keeping a gratitude journal. Just write 4 or 5 things every day that you're grateful for. Here's why it matters. Our brain and our lizard is attended to instantly remember every bad thing. You have to focus on a positive thing for 12 seconds for you to remember it and get the positive reaction. And 12 seconds is about the amount of time it takes you to write down one thing that you're grateful for. Almost nobody lays in bed before they go to sleep thinking about everything that's good in their life, right? Does anybody lie awake and you just keep thinking about good stuff? You probably have to train yourself to do that. How about, have you ever find yourself going over undone stuff, worries, right? Before you go to bed. Our brains are naturally attuned to the negative. So everybody think of one thing right now that you're grateful for. I'll count to 12. Everybody got one? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There, that's enough to change your brain state. So if you do a list of these from 4 to 5 a day, it doesn't take very long. Here's what it does, is it makes your mindset believe that the cup is half full, okay? You neurologically wire yourself into habitual optimism. So when our rancher friend and client lost so much, right, then he had that habit of what's good. Well, I still have one herd left. The community's been great. We have a camper that we're going to live in until we can rebuild. He didn't just look towards the disaster, and his disaster was about as bad as it gets. Okay, so it takes you 6 weeks of regularly doing this to create habitual optimism. And it sounds like a little thing, but it really works and it builds over time. The other thing is that we all have to not worry that we worry. Okay, so she says, I bet he's thinking about other women. And he's saying, I wonder if I should add radish to my cover crop. Okay, so why do we have this? Isn't that awful that we have evolved so that, right, we have to focus on the positive, but we automatically input the negative? And that's because the chance that we're all here compared to all of our ancestors over hundreds of thousands of years is vanishingly slim, right? So the anxious among us live to survive, right? You know, gee, I better fortify that door. Seems like we have enough, but I'll pick more, right? Whatever it is, right? Worriers survived, and we hold on to worry more often. So this is another strategy, which is not to worry that you worry, right? And a strategy that goes with this is if you find yourself worrying, just tell yourself, I'm going to worry later. I will worry every day between 7:30 and 7:45, and just make yourself stop, right? Because we can get anxious about anxiety. Again, these might seem like softy skills, and they are soft skills, right? But they're very important because, again, farming and ranching is top of the charts, right, for stress. So make a mission statement. This comes from a sod farm that we visited. So keeping your purpose right in front of you every day is important too, right? So you're looking at the long game regularly. They had both of these, the soil health principles and their mission statement, up in their main workroom, and they looked at it every day. This is from a woman who does flowers and vegetables. So having a vision board is important too. And this is kind of an interesting strategy because if you do a vision board for what you want your farm or ranch to look like, or if you're a conservationist and you invite people in for strategies, you can actually have a session where people make, vision boards and do mission statements. Again, 75% of our sensory apparatus is visual, and when we see it, our lizard believes it, okay? That's why they work. The lizard's like, wow, this is a pretty great life, right? The lizard is not smart, right? You trick out the lizard by looking at that every day. The lizard starts to believe in it. It calms you down when you see those kinds of vision boards, so that's a good strategy. And this is very important, which is to take pictures. It takes a while to have a farm and a ranch change, right? And you can forget where you're at in the process. So on your own farm or ranch, or have people that you work with, ask them to send you pictures, take pictures. I think of pasture as sort of like a college graduation, that it takes 4 years, freshman, sophomore, junior pasture, right? So it's a 4-year process before you can get a really degraded pasture healthy. And it helps to remember where you were when you started. This is really important. It's self-reinforcing when you take pictures. You can also do water infiltration. You can do bricks. You can do other measures like that so that you're tracking your own progress. So this is another one that we all need to have self-esteem. And for some people, it feels like if I change practices, I was doing it bad before and I was bad, right? So if I'm doing conventional grazing, I was a bad rancher, I was a bad farmer. If you're talking to people that are interested in changing, bring it up. Just say, look, everyone did this, right? We're just in a different time. Everybody used to till. And so that can be an esteem risk that can keep somebody from starting. So something to keep in mind, too, is that farmers and ranchers are not winning the social self-esteem lottery. There's a lot in culture that looks down on farmers and ranchers, right? You're allowed to sort of make fun of farmers and ranchers, but you wouldn't see pictures like this that would be associated with any other profession, right? But there's this sense that you don't have to be very smart. So if your son or daughter is a doctor or a lawyer, right, parents are always happy. Sometimes farmers and ranchers encourage their kids not to be a farmer. Have you ever experienced that? Hands up. So in my family, we have farmers that tell their kids not to farm, right? It's going to be hard work and you won't have a good social position. So this is built into it too. So this is a cartoon, related to what Michael Bloomberg said. He said, I could teach anybody, even people in this room, no offense intended, to be a farmer. You dig a hole, you put a seed in, you put dirt on top, and then up comes the corn. So, right? And so this is something that somebody felt perfectly comfortable saying about the profession, that it wasn't as, you don't have to learn and how to think and analyze, I guess, like in the tech fields. So this is part of the culture, right? So we have to know that farmers and ranchers are one or two steps down on the cultural self-esteem ladder. And right, if they're going to change your practice, it's like, I know how to be a conventional rancher well, right? Do you see what I mean? And you're asking me, when I start a new practice, then I'm going to have to do amp grazing and I won't be as good. That can be an esteem risk, right? So here's another factor. My husband first drove a 56 International tractor alone to plow a field when he was 9, and his dad didn't tell him how to put the brakes on. Yeah, so another thing that goes with this is that in rural communities, there tends to be what's called a more authoritarian parenting style. So I remember getting in trouble for something with my parents, and I didn't do it. And they said, well, you probably did something else, so the punishment is for that, right? So there's this sense that, like a farm family, rural communities, is that you're overwhelmingly valued for doing what we tell you and working hard, right? Just work hard at it, work hard. And so there are studies, of how emotional traits and personality traits relate to parenting. And it just means that more of us that come from rural backgrounds are valued for just working hard instead of being creative, right? We're not valued when we stand still, right? We value if we're mucking out an old grain bin or, helping to plow. So that's a factor too that can affect it, right? So it can be better to be good at a bad practice than to be bad at a good practice, right? So these are conversations we have to have internally with ourselves and with the people that we work with. And the trick is that when stuff goes well on the farm, we feel happy, right? So when prices are high for the cattle, when we have a good harvest, it feels like we did something good. But if something goes wrong that's out of our control, right, if prices change, if we have drought and flood, we tend to feel shame and responsible. Do you see how that's a trick for us, right? And so that's part of the emotional challenge of being a farmer and rancher, is we take credit for outcomes that are good luck, but we take responsibility when there's really nothing we could have done. All right, so how about shame? What are strategies for this? This is the big one, which is to notice if you have an inner critic. Okay, so that is my grandmother's voice. She calls me Miss Betsy. Miss Betsy, I can't believe you lost that. Get going. Are you late? Try harder. So Miss Betsy is this voice in my head, right? How many people ever have a voice nagging you or criticizing you? Hands up. That's a lot, okay? And so you have to realize that you have it, and then don't let yourself talk to yourself like that, because it's making you anxious, it's undermining your self-esteem, right? It's undermining your sense of safety. You have to deliberately try to rewrite that and speak back to that. And I used to think I didn't have one, and then I realized it was like my whole personality. And I actually have 2 PhDs. It's like, oh, maybe that's why. It's the voice always saying, do better, try harder. Okay, so this is you can do a drawing, consciously be aware of it and say, it's fine, right? You didn't order your seed, that's fine. Just go ahead and order it today. See how those are connected? You have to let yourself off the hook. So love and belonging are an issue. A lot of rural towns and counties have depopulated and, children move away, friends get old and die. So it's very important for people to make new connections in rural America. So everybody here clearly has made a connection. People are coming and they're joining. That, I should give credit, that was from a field day at Gail Fuller's place a couple of years ago. This is the story of Michael Thompson. So he starts off, and they first were working on, just Michael was trying regenerative practices, and then his family got involved by 2013. And then by 2023, he started the Kansas Soil Health Alliance and got increasingly hooked in. So connections is very important. There's a lot of loneliness in rural America, and there's different ways that people can address this. Has anybody heard of the James Ranch in Durango? So they're a ranch, and they actually have 5 siblings that do different enterprises. So they have dairy cattle, they have beef cattle, they have pigs, they use the dairy whey to feed the pigs, they have a restaurant, they do some horticulture. So another idea related to getting more people involved is that some farmers and ranchers are selling 5 acres on a land contract to a young family to do something like horticulture, a greenhouse, eggs. Why? Because then that gets that family started, but it also gives them another set of hands to help sometimes, right? And it's emotionally healthy to mentor somebody, and it's good if you have to go out and, walk the fence. It's nice to do it with somebody else. So there's all kinds of young people that want to farm regeneratively, they want to ranch, and they just don't have any access to land. So this is a strategy, is to try to involve more young people on your land, give them an enterprise. So we have a property, our southeast Kansas, where we have cattle. I would really want to get goats out there to eat up some of these raspberries, and, goats and cattle eat different things. I just feel like the goats will be all over the county. Goats intimidate me. So I kind of think it'd be nice to have another family run the goats, or be in charge of the goats in some way, maybe get some goat dairy out there. We could sell somebody 5 acres on a land contract, and then it would mean if I come here, they can be taking care of the cattle, they can be moving fence. So this is very important, is that we have to all get better connected. So anger is a big deal. Does everybody feel like farm policy is always fair? Yeah, it's been a lot, right? So I went through the hog crisis where I saw a lot of friends lose farms. In Kansas, the big get big or get out. We have all sorts of towns that are full of empty houses. Country of origin, labeling, monopoly, there's commodity fixing, right? So this is sort of baked into farming. So what can help with feelings of resentment? Justified injustice. Right? So habitually reflecting on your purpose is really important. And also to shift perspective. Now, this is, again, one of those ways to psych yourself out. Can anybody think of somebody in your past, maybe a boss, a colleague, it could be relative, and they just kind of still piss you off? Is there anybody that has that? Okay, so you can find yourself ruminating, and there can be more of these unjust dealings, in the rural community. So here is the strategy. If a 3-year-old bites you on the thigh, do you get mad forever? No, right? Because they're just a 3-year-old. So the strategy is to consciously think of that person as a toddler. So some people literally print out the picture and they put that adult's face over this baby in diapers. And it helps. What it does is it gets you to stop having that terrible feeling of resentment that can just fester and fester, right? Is to imagine them as a baby. Because truly people who do awful things are either, emotionally or morally undeveloped. Now this is a strategy that has to do with anger. It also has to do with fear. So I have a friend that got bitten by a rattlesnake. She has a ranch. It's really affected her ability to get back out there. Whatever it is, whether it's a person that you're mad at or a thing that you're afraid of, like rattlesnakes, you envision yourself fighting the person or fighting the rattlesnake, okay? Whatever it is. And then what it does is it tells your inner lizard, we're facing the rattlesnake again and we're not dying. It just takes 5 minutes. You just do it for a couple minutes every day. All right, we're fighting the rattlesnake and we don't die. We're fighting the rattlesnake and we don't die. Whatever it is. And then it's interesting because it can take a month or two and then it just lets go. So she did this and then she just one day wasn't afraid anymore to go out on the ranch. All right, the best antidote for feelings of injustice are action and power. All right, so everybody, what do you think of when you think of the word power? Can I have some words? Money, control, more? Strength, more? What? Inputs. Influence. Who has money? Who has power in our society? The rich, government, military. So these tend to be, kinds of words that we associate with power. All right, how does that get in our way? All right, so I want everybody to think of a time when you recently felt empowered, right? Something that mattered to you came to fruition. Can everybody think of a time? All right, this is your real experience with power. Okay, we have to change our internal curriculum about power. Has everybody got that? All right, what words do you associate when something like this happened? How did you feel? Can I hear the words? Satisfied, relieved, content, confident, peaceful. Okay, right? So these are the kinds of things, right? So we have to know that we have this sort of curriculum from society that we don't have power to make changes, right? It's sort of also like that idea of attending to the negative is easy for our brain compared to attending to the positive, right? And so we are actually in a really good time. We are in the upswing curve of much more adoption of regenerative practices. And it's true that all kinds of communities are healing. We're significantly restoring communities economically. People have more autonomy. They have more happiness. This is going on, right? So I travel a lot, and I visit a lot of communities where people are doing great things. And we don't see this on the news, right? We don't see how people are opening up their own grocery stores, revitalizing local food systems, making more profits on their farm. This is happening right now. And in the broader context, our work is very important because we know that by increasing soil carbon, so if we increase soil humus by just 1%, it takes out 360 billion tons of CO2. And that's 50% more than all of the carbon since the Industrial Revolution, right? So a lot of the young people that I work with are afraid about the future, and they worry about global warming. But agronomically, when we restore our ecosystems, we have a really good path to restoring the health of the planet. And this is powerful, right? So this also has to do with broader sense of purpose, right? So we know that grazing is a carbon sink. We know that regenerative ag is a huge carbon sink, right? So in conclusion, personal growth fosters financial growth, which in turn promotes healthy animals and food, and it strengthens community development, right? And so farmers and ranchers have a big emotional challenge because of our contexts, but if we can build these growth mindsets, we're in a much better position. Now, I've talked about strategies that might seem a little silly, like eating the frog and making that list every day, doing your gratitude journal, doing your done list. There's a bunch of neuroscience, right, that tells us that these practices work, right? So you have to think about emotionally working out to be your best as a farmer and rancher, just like physically working out. Does it work out? Does it have an effect if you work out for a week? Does it? No, well, a little bit, but you don't get a permanent muscle growth, right? Compared to if you do it for 3 months or 6 months, right? So we have to make it not exotic to change our own mindsets. If we do practices, right, emotional workout practices like managing your inner critic, keeping a gratitude list, making a done list, making an eat the frog list, you build grit. Some people are lucky and they come by it naturally, and that's not most of us, right? But we can all change through specific practices and develop a lot more emotional resilience. All right, I am finished.
Thank you so much, Dr. Heilman, double Dr. Heilman. Yeah. All right, we will still be using Poll EV, so you have questions, throw them on there, and we will try to get through as many as we can before our next speaker.
What's the best strategy to start with? Is that working? Okay, the best one is eat the frog. It isn't really fun. I don't like it. I can't stand anything to do with paperwork for my farm, you know? So I don't like cost share paperwork. I have to fill out this thing to get like wetland permission. And, you know, it has to do with I was poor in college. I don't know. That's my excuse, whatever. But it's safety trauma stuff, right? How many people have anxiety around money stuff or paperwork, bureaucracy? That's a fairly common one, especially among farmers. So I have to put that on my list or I will miss the deadline. And do I like it? I never like it, right? I never like it 100% of the time. So I have to force myself to do it, just like I realized I'm always going to forget the dentist unless it's on the list. So this is the most... The biggest rewards is eat the frog. Force yourself to do your priorities. Another question? Does anybody not procrastinate in this room? Okay, what you need to know is it's not a bad habit, it's not a character failing. People procrastinate as self-soothing for two things. For anxiety and safety trauma, you feel better if you don't face it. Right? The lizard is saying, let's just not do it now. The other one is esteem trauma. Those are the two big ones, okay? It's always a self-soothing, right? It's a maladaptive response to stress.
All right, next question. What can farmers do to increase their position in society?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, it makes me really angry. I give presentations all the time. I think we need to be talking to other people outside of our communities and to always clap back, right, when we hear those kinds of comments, right? So we have to start telling our stories. I think that films like Kiss the Ground, To Which We Belong, you know, the recent films that a lot of people have seen have started to make farming and ranching cool again. So that helps, right? So every level of media, so regular media, newspaper and stories and articles, social media, and then for all of us to talk to communities that we don't necessarily talk to.
Dr. Heilman, do you know what resources there are for farmers to seek free counseling or how to deal with trauma?
Well, yes, farmers tend to be usually in the top 1 or 2 categories of suicide, right? So there's a lot of mental health resources, but they aren't always, counselors don't always understand farmers' lives and traumas. So what I think is most effective is to belong to a community-based groups, okay? Community self-help actually is better, it has more effect rate than one-on-one counseling, right? So that means going to a codependent, you know, or adult child of an alcoholic 12-step group, or going to, you know, any of the, you don't have to pose as an addict if you're not, but you know all the 12-step groups are really good. And you know, there's also Anxiety Anonymous. You know, there's a number of these self-help groups. And I have a book coming out pretty soon that's a growing grit group that I would like to have farmers meet around these issues in particular, right? So my father-in-law used to meet with 4 other farmers on a week-to-week basis, right? And I think that was really important for their mental health. It's these self-organized groups are important. So for those of you that work with farmers, you can give them these strategies. You can set up informal groups. It helps meet social needs, right? And people can practice these strategies. What we've learned about counseling is that talk therapy doesn't help nearly as much as day-to-day practices, okay? So set up a system to help you do daily practices. Community, yeah, but you know, but sometimes people need that formally. And people need permission to talk about their emotional vulnerabilities, right? And you can grow up feeling like you just have to work harder or be strong and put up with stuff.
All right, well, please join me in thanking Dr. Heilman for her wonderful talk.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.